Thank you for watching this episode of WEBN. I'm Sarah Ewall-Wice, and today I have a very special guest here on the show with us. State Representative Tom Conroy is here. Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Representative. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Sarah.
All right, so here today we're discussing your campaign for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts.
Yes.
So just let's get to know you a little bit before we get into that. If I say Tom Conroy, what are 4 things that come to mind?
Well, state representative from Wayland. I've been up at the State House for 3 terms now, 5 years. Businessman with a conscience. I've worked in the private sector for 16 years. Father of triplet daughters who are 15. A lot of people sort of get a kick out of that. And a guy who walked this summer over 650 miles throughout the Commonwealth, visiting over 125 cities and towns. So those would be some labels, I guess, or catchphrases that folks would associate with me, Tom Conroy.
So let's start with the state representative. You were elected in 2006. What have you done to impact Massachusetts since taking office?
Well, one of the proudest achievements I have is when I was a freshman state representative, just in my first term, I authored a section of the life sciences bill that became law that the governor signed in 2008. That is creating jobs right now, right here in Massachusetts, in the life sciences and biotech field. And it actually is encouraging people to move from other areas of the country, like North Carolina and California and New York, to come to Massachusetts and participate in this cluster of excellence, because what it does is set up a revolving fund of money and basically equity that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts can use to fund entrepreneurs, scientists, research and development, new businesses in that industry over the course of the next several decades. And this is going to allow Massachusetts to just have a pipeline of job growth in this industry for decades to come. And I think that's a wonderful plan for our future.
So how does becoming a state rep, how does that change if you were to become the U.S. Senator?
Right, so right now, I mean, I'm a state rep, and so focused on both my district, which is Lincoln, Sudbury, and Wayland, and 40,000 people, but also the entire state. When you try to get up to the next level in the United States Congress, where I used to work as a staff person, both on the House side and in the United States Senate, you're thinking about the whole state, all 6.5 million people. Of course, but you're also playing on a national stage and, quite frankly, dealing with international issues as well. And as somebody with national security and foreign policy experience, I would relish having an impact on decisions that are being made, such as the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, what we're doing in the Middle East right now, and other hotspots around the world. So I think I'm very well qualified to get up to that next level of legislative work.
You mentioned already having been in Washington. Can you just give us a little bit of information about when that happened and what you did there?
Sure. So right after college, I went down to Washington, worked on an alternative military budget with a think tank down there as an alternative to what Ronald Reagan was putting together, which I thought was sort of a bloated military budget without looking at really efficiency and effectiveness. I also worked for Senator Gary Hart, Democrat from Colorado, former presidential candidate, and then Senator Barbara Mikulski from Maryland, both good Democrats.
So let's go over to the campaign for a little bit and just look at that. Basically, you mentioned walking 657 miles across the state.
Yes.
Why did you decide to do that?
Well, when I was in Washington, I had the honor and privilege to meet a senator by the name of Lawton Chiles, who had a nickname of Walkin' Lawton, because what he did as a relatively unknown state, he was a state rep, I believe, or state senator in the Florida legislature. When he was running for United States Senate in 1970, he walked from one end of Florida all the way to the other, and boosted his name recognition, really got to know the state, understood the different sort of regional economies in the state, and went on to win that race. And it became, I was fortunate enough to know him, know one of his staff persons, and it became the impetus behind my walk. It's a model that's been proven. And Mel Carnahan, actually from Missouri, did the exact same thing, and he won his Senate race there a couple of decades ago. So.
What were some of the big issues you saw that people needed help with here in Mass?
Jobs, jobs, jobs. That is the refrain I heard again and again. There's a lot, and once you get outside of 495, there's a lot of people out there who have been laid off, and I've got stories of dozens of them in which they'd been working 25, 30 years at a good, steady middle-class job with decent wages and decent benefits, but when I saw them this summer, they had been out of work for 2, sometimes 3 years. So that's a huge issue. I think transportation issues are enormous. I saw our crumbling infrastructure, our roads and our railways, buildings and bridges collapsing sort of all over the place and at risk of really holding back our economic productivity and our not really creating an environment that's conducive to business growth and job growth. So those were 2 things, jobs and infrastructure, that were really, really noticeable. And of course, heard other stories about healthcare access and healthcare costs, improving our school systems, protecting the environment, some of the more standard issues that you would expect you'd hear from voters all across the state.
There's a lot of dissatisfaction across the country, and it's even spread across the world here with the Occupy movement.
Yes.
What issues do you think you can address for them? What would you say to those people?
Well, I certainly empathize with their frustration over things like income inequality, with CEO salaries, I think, way out of whack with in comparison to the average worker at some of the companies where those CEOs are managers. I certainly empathize with the fact that the tax system is not as fair as it could be. We've got hedge fund managers generating $10, $20, $30 million or more in annual income, but because it's mostly capital gains revenue, it's being taxed only at 15%. And so somebody making $60,000 or $70,000 a year is actually on a percentage basis paying more money than those individuals. That's just not the right way to set up your tax system. It's not fair right now. So I think people are angry at that. They're also angry at the fact that the economic malaise that we're in was caused in part by what was going on in Wall Street 3, 4, 5 years ago. And there haven't been the kinds of prosecutions or people held accountable on Wall Street for almost bringing down the entire global economy. And people want some sense of justice. And that, I think, is another part of the frustration that's fueling the Occupy Boston movement.
Have you been to Occupy Boston?
I have. I've stopped by. I've talked to some folks. I looked at the posters, and there's some neat charts about what's right with America and what people think is wrong with America. And I think it's a great movement in the sense of they're actively engaged citizens, and they're giving voice to their own thoughts and emotions and perspectives. And that's in part why I walked around the entire state, is to be the voice of the people. That's in part why I'm running for the United States Senate, because I have sensed over the course of the past several years that people feel disenfranchised with the political process, disillusioned, disconnected. They think lobbyists control too much of what the agenda is and what the priorities are down in Washington and to some extent up at the State House. I don't take lobbyist money. I can work with lobbyists and all that, but I'm really trying to focus on giving voice to the people of Massachusetts because they do feel disillusioned. And I think that's something that's fueling the Occupy Boston and Occupy Wall Street movement as well.
Moving back to the campaign, the dynamic has changed a lot in the past few months. So Alan Casey recently withdrew his campaign, and also on top of that, two other candidates have withdrawn recently.
Right.
Are you in this for the long haul?
Well, I still see a path to victory here. I mean, it's actually easier for me now, and I've got a clearer path than I did just 3 or 4 or 5 weeks ago with Seti Warren and Bob Massey and Alan Casey dropping out. So when you think about winning enough delegate support at the Democratic Convention next June, it's really down, I think, to both Elizabeth Warren and myself. So I'm confident that I can do that. And then it's really a two-person race in that regard. So, and it's very early. This is a very unpredictable business, politics and election cycles. Who would have predicted 6 or 7 weeks ago that those 3 candidates would have dropped out? I don't think anybody would have predicted that. So we've got a long way to go. It's still very early. I'm a seasoned campaigner. I've got a message that is resonating with a lot of voters and a lot of folks out there. Again, I'm getting very positive feedback. I do believe I'm the most qualified candidate out there in terms of my government experience, my business experience, my foreign policy and national security experience, the fact that I've written laws, the fact that I've campaigned before, and I'm the only one out there who has a track record of beating successfully an incumbent Republican. So all good qualifications. So I'm still hopeful, and we're going to keep going.
You mentioned beating the incumbent.
Yes.
Senator Scott Brown
Yes.
has been in office since 2010. What do you think of his work as a senator here in Massachusetts?
Well, I just don't see him as a very effective United States senator. He's not a leader. He's very much of a follower. He sort of makes decisions at the last minute depending on which way the wind is blowing or which way he perceives it's blowing. I think he's not somebody that, if you look at his track record at the State House, he's one where he's put forward a lot of initiatives that have gotten a lot of traction and have become law. I would love to be able to compare in a general election my list of accomplishments as a legislator versus his. And in essence, what people would see is that next to me, he comes across as someone with an empty list. And I think I've got the breadth and the depth of knowledge and passion for public service on all the issues that so many people in Massachusetts care about that he doesn't seem to be focused on. And I'm not really sure what his priorities are, but it's not clear what they are, and it's not clear that he's out there leading on any particular issue on behalf of the people of Massachusetts.
Okay, representatives in Washington just don't seem to be able to compromise out of late. How would you address that lack of compromise, and what would you do differently in Washington, D.C.?
Sure. Well, when I worked in the United States Senate, I saw that ability to set up a culture, and it was a culture of collaboration, congeniality, and cooperation and compromise. And I think we need to return to that. How do you do that? I think you need to have the ability to draw lines in the sand and stand by and stand up for your principles and your values, and articulate those very clearly and very passionately, as I have done over the course of the past 5 years at the State House. But at the same time, you need to know when the country and the state of Massachusetts is calling for results, and they want good outcomes, and they want progress down in Washington. So that's where compromise comes in. And I think you need to set up personal relationships with your colleagues in the United States Senate, both Democrats and Republicans, in order to get those kind of results. And you've got to have a willingness to do that kind of compromise. And I jokingly say sometimes, because maybe it's because I had 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers, and I was the guy right in the middle, that I'm a natural negotiator and mediator and compromiser. But I have a lot of those qualities I think that Ted Kennedy had, quite frankly. You know, the ability to draw that line in the sand and really articulate the principles, but at the same time reach across the aisle and get some positive results done.
So you mentioned jobs as the biggest issue
Yes.
here. What would you do? What would be the first thing you would do in Washington to address that?
Well, I'm about to roll out a 5-point jobs plan as part of this campaign, and the first part of that would address the infrastructure issue I made reference to earlier. We need to put carpenters, electricians, pipe fitters, plumbers, engineers back to work, rebuilding our roads and our railways, our buildings and our bridges. I was just down at the Cape last night talking about the need for a $4 billion wastewater treatment plant for the whole region, all 15 towns in the Cape, because no individual town can afford it. The municipalities can't afford it, the state can't afford it. We need federal government support for that. So I believe in the President's jobs program. I want to go even further. I'd like to roll out a $300 billion 5-year plan to rebuild our infrastructure. That could create hundreds of thousands of jobs here in Massachusetts. So that's point number 1. I think we can do more in terms of tax credits and investments in the renewable and alternative energy field, in terms of increasing the amount of sophisticated, precision, high-tech manufacturing that goes on here in Massachusetts. I think we can make this a self-funding mechanism by replicating what I did, as I talked about earlier, in the life sciences and biotech industry, where we can get equity stakes in companies that we're investing in as a government and then sell that stock later on in order to return those monies back into the industry. And lastly, a made in the USA tax credit, so that if you go to Target, for example, and you buy 10 items, well, the SKUs, the numerical item codes for each one of those purchases has a determination on where that product is made: Malaysia, China, USA. If it's made in the USA, you should be able to hand in at the end of the year to the IRS the receipts for those purchases and get a tax credit. That will encourage people like you and me to buy products that are made in the USA and therefore lead to more American jobs. So those are some ideas that I have to increase job growth here in Massachusetts and across the country.
Thank you so much for coming in and talking with us. It's really great. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching this WEBN episode. I'm Sarah Ewall-Wice. Have a good day.